First of all, to finish with all formalities, I would like to thank. I started this project in 2015, and the first installation been done for Kyiv Biennial. After that, the fellowship in Austria, Künstlerhaus Buxenhausen, helped a lot with the development of the film. And I would like to thank them, and personally Andrei Siklodi, the curator of the fellowship. After that, obviously, I would like to thank VC Foundation for supporting the work and for giving me opportunity to show this project in Moscow, and personally Anna Ilchenko, curator of the exhibition, and Elza Abdulhakova, the coordinator of the project. And later it will be shown in Italy, 1st of December, with Emanuele Guidi and Argi Kunst Balsano. The same project, but a bit different. Just to end up with the formalities. I will speak briefly, very briefly about the project, mainly about the film. Maybe we'll focus more on the film. The film you see upstairs. It's 28 minutes. Somehow divided in 3 parts. The first part, the first location, first 2 locations are mixed between each other. There's this kind of parallel montage between Photographic Archive in Milan. It's an archive of ex-Friendship Society, Italy-USSR. Nowadays it's Italy-Russia. Public association, cultural association run by a group of people interested in culture, whatever, Russian culture, language, and other things. And they hold archive of Soviet photographic exhibitions sent to Italy from 1946 to 1991. They also received a lot of films, 16mm reels and 35mm films. Now they're all preserved in Bologna, in the Film Archive of Bologna. That's the second location, the second chapter of the film. Both locations are somehow mixed, so you see photographs together interrupted by fragments of films. The third one, it's Luxembourg, Clairvaux Castle, where now the exhibition, the Family of Man, is reconstructed. The exhibition curated by Edward Steiking, curator and the first director of Department of Photography in MoMA. Just after the appearance of Department of Photography become recognized as an art form. It's rebuilt in Luxembourg because he was born there. Three locations. The whole story, we're speaking about Cold War. The project is focused on the question how images are functioning in political culture. So chronological coordinates are the Cold War, the second part of the 20th century. This particular period when 2 major mass political projects of 20th century are competing between each other. We're speaking about capitalism and socialism. And they're competing not exclusively, but mainly through the means of culture and through visual media. And speaking about visual media in this particular period, we're speaking about photography, about photographic media, photographic imagery, so it's photos and films. To show photos in 50s or 60s, it means to send prints somewhere. When you send images, you can insert them in a magazine, you can do a photo essay in Life magazine or in Paris Match, or you need to organize the space of collective perception of the images, so the build photographic exhibition. That's what Soviet Union been doing, and in particular the agency called VOX, the All-Union Society for Friendship Relationships with Foreign Countries. So sending folders with the prefabricated photographic exhibitions with instruction how to display them, how to set up the photo exhibition, sending them all over the world. In this particular case, I'm working with the materials left in Italy. On the other hand, exactly in the very same moment, United States Information Agency been traveling around the world the photographic exhibition, The Family of Man, which is probably the most famous photo exhibition in the world. It's kind of monument to the medium. So I'm trying to compare and contrast the both the remnants somehow of both political projects. In case of Family of Man, it's not remnants, but it's a monument to an exhibition, in attempt to understand what these images can tell us now, what it means to look at the pictures, to look at the past from now from today, in attempt to read these images, to elaborate on them. Personally, I encountered a series of problems which I had to solve during the work on this project, because I have maybe 140 folders with photo exhibitions. It's more than 4,000 prints. And it's two-dimensional. It's not a spatial thing as a Family of Man, because Family of Man is reconstructed. So I was thinking how to show them. And I came up with this solution to show them as a prints in their materiality, so not to insert them as a full frame in the video stream, but to show them on the table, to show that it's actually prints in a certain sequence as a gallery. For me it was a problem, how can you show an exhibition if it's in the folder? At the same time with Family of Man, how to film it? The obvious solution is a tour, because it's a space, you can move in this space. At the same time, I don't want to show you materials, I don't want to show to spectators the materials. I'm interested always in the perception of these materials. That's why there is a voiceover which elaborates on the images. Because at the end of the day, I think that to work with the history, with memory, and with the past, it's not about to see how things actually were, but trying to get in contact, in touch with these images, and try to understand what these images are telling you. It's a bit Benjaminian in a way idea. And with the Family of Man, the text, the captions that you see overlaying the video, it's a visitor's comments from 1959 from Moscow, because in 1959 the Family of Man traveled to Moscow. It was sent to Moscow by this United States Information Agency in an attempt to promote, let's say, Western values, freedom, democracy, and so on and so on, as all Soviet exhibitions been sent abroad to promote certain political values of a socialist project. That's why I would love to show you how this exhibition been perceived, because at the center of the project there is always this attempt to look on the history of exhibitions. And when we study the history of exhibitions, there is always a question, what was the perception of these exhibitions? How people actually saw them in a certain epoch, in a certain period. That's why you see this text that give you, I wanted to show you how people perceived it and not the work in itself. Well, the project is, not extremely complex, but contains many different things. Personally, for myself, I'm trying to define a list of keywords with which I can describe the whole project, and the keywords are obviously past, memory, and history, which I'm putting together in one line. And you see that it's a project which kind of looks backwards, but at the same time trying to speak about future or a present moment. The other keywords is documentary. It's a documentary film which works with the documents, with the visual documents, with the photographs, which with time they become political documents. There is a fiction element in the film. There is a voiceover which elaborates on images, which sometimes does not follow the facts. It follows the facts, but it does not give it directly to the spectator. So it's documentary, but at the same time it's an artist film. It's an artist film done with documents. So there's the spectrum of questions around the keyword documentary. Another keyword is obsolescence, because photography probably does not exist anymore. It does not exist in the form of print. Celluloid films probably do not exist anymore, and this film is digital and it's done in a digital form. And I'm asking myself if exhibition exists, if it's not an obsolete medium. And the question is, what does it mean to circulate and exchange exhibitions in globalized world of digital imaging and immediate communication? Does it make any sense to do exhibitions? Because my attempt was to speak about exhibitions doing an exhibition. Another keyword is propaganda, because despite the fact that these images they do not contain direct symbols of communism like red stars or red flags or something else, they tend to function as a soft power. They've been done, selected, curated, and sent abroad to communicate certain ideas. Something that is ongoing on a daily basis by other means, but again very much with the visual media. So it's let's say the universe of keywords, of some tags around which our conversation could go on. Would you like to add some other keywords, or would you like to go
That's a good specifically place to start, I think.
Specifically inside something and go deeper?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd be interested in asking you really how you conceive of the archival document, because it was really striking to me that near the beginning of the film, you go to this example of the erasure of Trotsky from the photograph. And I mean, I'm not sure, but my take on that was that it was a very interesting way of problematizing a kind of cliche that circulates all of the time now, which is that it's digitization that has made photographs unreliable.
Which is not true.
Which is not true, of course.
Which is not true.
But there's a sense that this is this seemingly unrelated episode at the beginning of the film. It doesn't kind of coincide with the other archives that you're working with. So it's seemingly unrelated, and yet I was wondering whether this is perhaps the key in terms of starting to think about how you're conceptualizing the malleability of documents and starting to think about really the use value of documents rather than simply the referential value of documents.
We're speaking about maybe the first minutes of the film. You see the photograph of Trotsky, of Lenin speaking in 1920 in Moscow on a demonstration, and you see Trotsky and Kamenev standing on the very same tribune. Later, obviously, there is the trial, the Trotsky-Zinoviev case, and the very same photograph. I mean, it's still not that clear because there's still a lot of kind of researches on this, because it could be the very same event, but something photographed later, but Lenin is exactly in the very same pose. So some people are changing their positions, but Lenin is not changing. So it's either it was retouched, either it's a different photograph, but still again retouched a bit. But anyhow, it doesn't matter, because among different photographs of this event, the photograph without Trotsky and Kamenev been selected to be sent abroad and featured at the exhibitions. I'm showing this photograph on the computer screen. And this image overlays the original print, so you see the empty tribune and the tribune with the two political figures. I'm showing it on the screen, which kind of breaks this vintage feel of the film on the laptop screen, because that's how you work with the documents, with images nowadays. Because in this film, I'm always trying to give the medium, to show the support, how these images are living nowadays. They are either prints, either film reels, or it's computer imagery that you see on screen, because I think that 95% of images that we see nowadays, we see them on screens, on these screens or others. That's about how this scene is formalized. Well, the document, again, I was thinking why this scene in general is there. You said that it seems unrelated. I wanted to ground this institution works in a certain historical context, to give a historical coordinate that it was founded in a certain period, this moment of revolution, a bit later, and to show that there is again this kind of underlying private narrative that Kamenev was the husband of the founder. Basically, institution founded by this women later being sending an image from which husband been erased. So you have this private story, personal, you have the medium, the screen, and you have obviously the moment of falsification. Because we can't trust these images. There is no possibility. Apart that all of them, they're staged. So all photographs you see in this film, it's so-called straight photography, which is documentary. I mean, it depicts real people in the real space. But sometimes it's just staged, even in a non-direct way. So not that someone is telling to someone else to do something, but the photographer is waiting for certain things. So the selection, the framing is very important. That's why, I mean, when I'm thinking about photography, I'm not thinking about what is photographed, but how, and most important, how it is shown. So that's why here we arrive to the point of exhibition. Well, and the status of document. I don't know, I'm seduced by them because they want to seduce me. It's evidences, because every time then you show something, you are showing evidences of to convince someone in your discourse, because images, they work very often as a support for discourse. Obviously, it functions like that in an exhibition during the public presentation of some material, because basically exhibition, what it means to exhibit something, it means to provide evidences of something which we keep in mind, and that's why this exhibition been done, to speak about communism, equality, or something else, providing some visual evidences. And that's why Family of Men been done, to speak about capitalism, freedom, and so on, providing some visual evidences. Because again, we live in this universe in which to see, it means to believe. Well, and they're all documentary, but at the very same time, they're not at all, even if they're not retouched. And the same thing with my film. It's documentary, it's real spaces, real cities, archives, but still, I would not. I'm using this word to describe it, but I don't know. It's artist documentary, or how to...
What does that mean for you, artist documentary? I mean, when we were talking last week also, you seemed reticent to call the film a documentary. And I guess I'd be interested to know why that is, or, you know, what's this sort of insistence on problematizing documentary as a category?
Well, first of all, I mean, on a very simple level, since I did it, I know how it was done, and I know how much of, like, simply manpower been invested in each second. And each second, even if it's in reality it's like that, but just by turning a lamp, just a little bit, the situation works completely differently. Even if in the film archive in Bologna, in a dark room, you see the table. This table is, shadows are done in a certain way to convey certain meanings, which function in completely kind of unconscious ways. So I don't know what could be documentary. Should it be a robot, some kind of scanning of reality, transferring it somewhere else, or something? Plus there is a voiceover, which actually tells you how you should apprehend these images. For me it was a problem, because I've been trying to do it without voiceover. So could it be just silent? I'm just showing you something and you decide what to do with it. I understood that at the end it's simple, there should be a narrator. And narrator is, I don't know, it's didactic figure. It's someone telling you what to do.
Sure, but I mean, your narrator is not, say, a kind of voice of God narrator. I mean, I think it's important to say that it's a woman's voice, and it's an accented voice, and it's a kind of questioning voice. It's a voice that quotes from other sources. Yeah. I mean, there's a sense that it's a very kind of impure voiceover that in some instances is undercutting its own authority. So it's much more of a sort of essayistic voiceover than something that we would align with, I don't know, explanatory documentaries of the 40s or 50s.
Absolutely. I mean, and here I can tell a couple of things about how it was done, because again, what it means to do voiceover, you need to choose which kind of voice. Will it be a man or woman, first of all? How she will speak, in which language, with which accent. Working with all this material, I saw that it's extremely masculine. We're speaking about these grand narratives. The state entities are speaking about mass political projects of 20th century. These big issues, this kind of tectonic movements of images, things, and so on. Plus, filmmaking is extremely masculine, like simply all these devices and tripods that are called Avenger or Predator or something. And I thought that something has to be done with it. You can't work with it in this kind of super masculine environment. I said, okay, it will be a female voice, which strangely functions as a neutral voice in the culture. And here, how she will speak. Will she speak in the perfect English, or British, American, or she will speak with an accent? And she's a Russian, Елена Vogman, I thank her, helped incredibly. She will speak in clean English, the correct English, but with the Russian accent, which allows her to pronounce Russian words correctly, but still she sounds alien. She's someone who is trying to communicate with the foreigners. She's someone learned another language, someone trying to connect with someone else, and you perceive that she's not the right person. Maybe she's different. And of course, the text. The text is an original work, but heavily based on many different works of different researchers. One of them is Oksana Sarkisova, and she will speak here in the public program in the next days. So it's again this work of collaging, combining, cutting and pasting and cutting up. And the text is written in a way that she always, the voice is always referring to the images and not to reality. And I did this kind of funny, embarrassing mistake, because the part in the film when she says that these images place Soviet women between coordinates of classic gender roles, I wrote it that Soviet women were placed. And Elena said, okay, I'm a Soviet woman, so where I'm placed? Can you just explain me for a second? How come that you're stating something? And we did it a bit differently. We did these images are placing someone somewhere. So it introduced this kind of maybe Faroki approach in a way. So you speak about images, you're not trying to state anything about reality because you actually don't know what happened, and it's difficult. Again, it's a question of document. How do you state something about reality, through which means? But you speak about something that you definitely have in front of you, this image just on the table.
It's interesting that you bring up Harun Farokhi. I wanted to ask you, again, in this sense of making a documentary while being somehow suspicious of documentary, I was wondering, where you would locate your kind of precursors, or if you had to place the work with lineage, whether artistic or cinematic. I mean, we have Farokhi, but are there other kind of figures that you would say are important for the work?
Well, obviously there are all these great authors, Faroki, and I don't know if it makes any sense to quote them, because it seems that like everything been based on them, because they introduced certain paradigms of thinking. For me, strangely, this scene of from the film of Chris Marker, The Letters from Siberia.
The famous sort of 3 voiceovers relating to
so
the
basically
same
it's the same scene. It's the very same scene somewhere in some city in Siberia. Why this film is interesting? It's probably, I don't know if you know better, if it's the first found footage film.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not, but still, Chris Marker, I don't remember, he probably never traveled to Siberia. It was something outsourced.
He did, I believe.
He did?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You see, documentary. No, that's why you're here. That's why you're here. So it's the very same scene. People are paving the road or something in some dirt or the very same scene repeated 3 times, and the voiceover says that glorious labor of people somewhere, they're happy and everything is okay. And you see that it's amazing. They're just building a new city, and everything is fine. It's very kind of uplifting atmosphere. After that, he said that poor Soviet people oppressed somewhere else are engaged in some slave labor, and you see that it's awful. It's just terrible, very sad. And the third version, I don't know, neutral, that someone is just doing some work on the street. So for me, it was about power of voiceover. So that's why I started to struggle with it, to think what can be done. Should it be men, women, or because I mean, this work of art, this film gives you it's a film about films. It's films about filmmaking, which teaches us more than, I don't know, course of filmmaking. Shows you that you need to take, this thing seriously, voiceovers, images.
But it's interesting because in a way that returns us to this earlier question about the status of the document, because it's one way of describing this kind of malleability of meaning that can accrue to one single document. And it seems like to me in your film, that idea of changeable meaning exists alongside an assertion of the specific concrete materiality of documents, and really the sense that that materiality matters.
Absolutely.
And I guess I'd be interested, again, it's sort of like against this background of the digital dematerialized circulation of images, we have in your film this return again and again to hands holding photographic prints or to looking at films through a moviola. We can absolutely imagine an artist who would work with these materials and completely neglect to show any of those things. So why these media apparatuses?
2 things together, because all this project and exhibition also based on attempt to basically to redeploy some already existing cultural material in a different environment, to remediate some images into cinema or to put them in display in an exhibition space. When you are trying to remediate something in a contemporary world, you encounter this huge problem of rights, on copyright, and we can link it to the commons. Sure. At the end of the film, and actually commons of knowledge. So now there is a complicated moment with the digital culture, with the digital imaging, that rights on images. How can you show something? So basically you can't show anything. There's just no way to show any previous material. At some point it's even difficult to film a building or just something on the street. So if I would like to show these films or these photographs just placed on a full frame without support, I need to pay rights to someone to cover the rights for the images. It's literally impossible in this particular case because these films, for example, if we're speaking about films, they're in this strange gray zone. Because technically the rights should belong to some Soviet studio which did it somewhere else. But since many years they're abroad, and now they're protected by Italian law, which protects cultural heritage. So no one actually knows who holds the rights. They're really literally lost in time, these materials and this archive. So there is this obstacle, just technically difficult to understand how can you do it. Another one, really for me, been super important, the materiality, that we're speaking about prints, and we're even not speaking about slides or some kind of primary image from which you are producing copies. But it's just a copy already. It's this print, this particular photograph, which been on display, sent somewhere, and with the films. Because I think that you can get the point of view of researcher. In this particular case, I don't know, of me, because that's how I encounter them. Because it's about how you encounter past. It's not only how you encounter past as a historical political narrative, but also how you encounter past in the form of prints, films, all the reconstructed exhibition, and so on and so on. So this about this ambiguity and materiality of an image.
Mm-hmm. And it's certainly something that seems increasingly lost to us today, maybe. There's the sense that this is a film that looks back at a kind of a slightly different world order than the one that we currently inhabit, but it also looks back at a different kind of media ecology than the one that we inhabit now. And so that, that pull of obsolescent media seems very strong in the film. And I think that's something that, it's been really widely written about, that so many artists really in the last 20 years or so have been drawn to working with outmoded technologies. And for some people that might mean making a 16 millimeter film and showing it in a gallery with a kind of noisy projector. You don't do that, but nonetheless...
I did it with the slides.
Yeah, that's true, with the slide projection.
I allowed...
Sure.
I wanted to do it.
But there is the sense that, some people have claimed that there's this kind of redemptive potential that resides in outmoded technology. Like it allows us to go back to a moment in the past and sort of step outside of a logic of progress or innovation and see how maybe history might have happened differently. And you said you were interested in obsolescence, and so I guess I'd be keen to know, why, what's at stake for you. Is it just that it offers a sort of tangibility that we're lacking, or is there actually a wager about history or a critique of a narrative of progress or something else more conceptual that's operating within that?
Yeah. For me, it's connected very much with the status of these materials, because they're disappearing, and they're going to disappear at some point. Since they have this physicality, you just can't actually tell when all these materials will be lost. These gelatin prints and celluloid films. They're lost. They're already lost. They're lost in many senses. They stuck somewhere. They never got back. It's this kind of archive that never meant to be preserved or stored. They're traveling from time, and I think that there is this kind of obsessive archival impulse. Let's preserve everything. Let's document it and let's keep it forever. I think that it's an advantage that everything will disappear, and these images will disappear, and technologies will become obsolete, because, I don't know, it gives a sense of perspective. Perspective in the sense that you can work with material, you can work with the past, you can work with political past, you can work with these images, because you know that it's ephemeral, and it has this kind of window of opportunity, very short, which will be closed at some point. Even with the digital media, it's the same.
Or especially with digital
media.
Yeah,
we have this kind of cognitive mistake, because we're speaking as if after prints, now we have iPhones, and it will be like that forever. No, iPhones indeed, and all these digital gadgets, they become obsolete even faster.
Film is actually a remarkably durable
it's
archival medium.
Centuries, yeah. And we are changing phones all the time, and tomorrow Apple will invent something, or some other corporation, and all these images will disappear. I learned it very well working with the film, like shooting the film, because we've been shooting in 4K. And I said, guys, but I mean, literally, no one has this 4K projectors. And they said it's future-proofing. Because that's what happened in 90s. Like, all digital video that's been shot in standard definition. And just overnight, HD TV became cheap. Everybody bought it. And all this massive amount of video looks bad. So there is basically no 4K TV, or no, very few 4K projections, but they're overdoing it. They're shooting with the highest quality possible at the moment, just trying to kind of to reach some point in the future where it will become common. And after that, what happens? The paradoxical thing that you downgrade the quality to show it today. So you downgrade it back to HD. So it's really very material, because at the end, even if you work with the digital file, you will show it. You will exhibit it at some point. You will exhibit this film, and here you encounter the reality, the tangibility of medium, the materiality of the light falling on the wall, which will be projected with a certain definition.
Maybe we can shift gears a little bit to talk about the specific archives that you're working with. On the one hand, there's a lot of similarity between them. On the other hand, they're radically different. So with the Family of Man, we have an authored, extremely famous exhibition that toured all around the world over a decade. And then with the Soviet examples, we have no author, very little research that's been done on them. And so I guess I'd be interested in hearing you speak a little bit about whether you think these archives are more similar or more different than each other. I know that the similarities and the differences are exactly what you're interested in putting attention.
Absolutely.
But I mean, like, is the idea of humanity, for instance, that comes through in both cases the same?
Wow,
or if not, I know it's a big one. That's a big one.
That's a big question. That's the big question. Well, no, we're always tempted. I mean, there is a massive of works on this topic. I mean, since it's visual culture and both political projects, communism and capitalism, USSR and US, they did pictures at the end, photographs. So maybe that's the point of where they coincide. So if they want to show some big abstract idea, like the whole world, they will try to photograph the planet. So maybe it will be the same images. Yeah, okay, at this point they coincide. But the family, for example, will it be represented in the same way? Probably. But at the same time, not. I mean, there is no answer. It's easy to kind of to put them in conflict, to say that it's something completely different. Just don't touch it, because the premises are different. It's the different political culture, different, in general, existential coordinates. So even despite the fact that they use the very same photo camera, the outcome is different, and first of all, you should look at it differently. Because the problem is not only how they did it, and how it looks like, but how you read them. Because when there's really this, we need to work a lot on how do we see things, because when we see Family of Man, we see it as something appealing, comparing to Soviet photographs.
I mean, although it was a massively criticized exhibition, I think my first encounter with the Family of Man was actually not the exhibition itself, but was reading Roland Barthes' critique
yeah, absolutely.
of it. So the exhibition was widely criticized for evacuating history and insisting on this kind of myth of shared humanity.
Here, just a brief note, and correct me if I'm making again some embarrassing mistakes, as with Chris Marker. So what is basically Family of Man? Family of Man is a selection of, if I'm not making a mistake, 503 or 13 photographs. Edward Steichen selected these images from the pool of 2 million images or something for 5 years, been selecting these photographs to create some kind of universal narrative. The exhibition is divided in chapters. The first chapter is the birth of the human. The human being is growing up, going to kindergarten, playing, dancing, the moments of unity, falling in love, studying, I don't know what else. So, I mean, it's an attempt to divide life in some nine keywords, main stages, which any human being on the planet can feel their own, like feel common, share this feeling of. After that, the human being is dying, and it's this circular structure of birth, kindergarten, love, death, and so on and so on. The basic unit of this narrative is family, this kind of social nucleus. And Roland Barthes wrote that basically what happens, that the idea is simple, that normally if you, and I think that he writes it exactly like that, if you scratch a human, you will find history. And Edward Steichen is trying to say that if you scratch human, you will find nature. You will find family, love, birth, or something else. In this particular case, in this context of Cold War, it functioned in a way that you evacuate the political contents, and you send this exhibition everywhere. Everybody are literally falling in love with it and impressed by this material, feel some kind of contact with it, but still it comes from a certain context. I'm really oversimplifying our relationship with the images.
But it's quite interesting that when you have in your film the sort of titles that give us an insight into how the Moscow visitors reacted, some of them saw the exhibition as a great exemplification of communism.
In a different ways, because I thought, yeah, you have this massive of critical texts on family of man, and it seems that there is a certain consensus that no one been fooled by it, or and so on and so on. And I mean, it's about like any research on images. It's like the book of Mitchell, that we should not think that some people somewhere else, some primitive people, fully believed in images, and indeed we are so emancipated and so critically minded that we are free of this. We do not believe in photographs because we understand that everything is staged as advertisement. Indeed, everything is a bit more nuanced, because maybe some primitive people, they were not fetishizing but still believing, and we are believing even more than them, and so on and so on. So, and I thought that, okay, if there is this critical consensus, and in Moscow, it will be in Moscow in '59, people would be even more critical towards it. They will really perceive it as some kind of bold propaganda. Indeed, no, there are some mixed opinions, and one anonymous spectator is trying to literally appropriate this material in a very interesting dialectical way, and they comment that it's a great contribution to communism, which indeed it could be read like that, because the unity, equality, solidarity, and also the values. And it moves us back to the question common and different in both things, because they also operated not only with the same media forms, with photography or film, but also with the same concepts: unity, solidarity, and so on, universality.
And I guess another thing that they both share in common is this sort of insistence that photography as a medium is not about looking at one single image, but it's first of all, about how images travel, or how images can travel around the world, but second of all, how images can signify in relation to one another. So they're both kind of montage practices in a certain sense, because the exhibition form, which I know is like a main area of interest for you, the exhibition form is really about creating a certain kind of rhetorical proposition, if not a narrative, around the kind of placement of these images in sequence.
Sure. Here's the interesting detail, because the reconstruction of Family of Men that you see in the film, and which you can see in Luxembourg, in Clairvaux, it's obviously not a literal reconstruction of the space, because you cannot repeat MoMA in some castle. The architecture is different. I spoke with the curator. They tried to rebuild, as you said, the relationships between images. So the rooms are different, the spaces are different, but relationships between images. So of course, I mean, there are no single image. They're all perceived as a sequence. That's why it's a slide projection. That's why there are basically not a lot of images or photographs in this exhibition, just a couple. And in the case of opening titles, they're one after the other, so it's just as a sequence. Because, I mean, and the slide projection is this form in between still image and the moving image and a cinema. So I think that, of course, the dialectical relationships between different things, this montage practice, this editorial practice at the end of the day, because Steichen, he's an author, but it's this kind of editorial authorship, because he did not photograph even, I don't know, one image in this show. It's photographs of someone else. And when I work with this material, because at the end of the day, the whole exhibition and the film, I mean, there are no my images. I did not photograph anything. It's just something redeployed, remediated somewhere. I think there are a lot of this editorial work. You create relationships between things. That's what installation art is about. Creating forms. Form, it means this kind of tangible relationships between things, between visual caption on the wall and the table. I mean, how it's done, sound, document.
But you told me that you were especially not interested in reconstructing these Soviet photo exhibitions, and certainly you don't upstairs. We see elements of them, and we have the slide projection, but that's not an exhibition that actually existed. It's one that you've kind of fabricated by drawing on the archive. And so, I mean, why was it important for you to move away from that idea of fidelity? Because normally if we think about, you know, the duty of a historian, it's somehow to be faithful. But you've said absolutely that that's sort of not your task. It's not about reconstruction, but it's somehow rather about reactivation or creating maybe new relationships that never existed as such at the time.
No, with this reenactment strategy, I don't know, I find it problematic because I don't understand what happens with the figure, with someone who is reenacting something. You're becoming what? You pretend to be a historical agent, and you're trying to fulfill intentions of some historical agent, and why it's done now, with what will happen if something will be reconstructed right now, right here in 2017. Isn't it more productive to to make the mechanism visible, to show how exhibition could be conceived through the document which tells you how it has to be done, to show the device which is showing it? I don't know, I thought that I'm distant from this epoch. We're all distant. We're looking at it from 2017, and we see it differently. So there's no sense try to repeat it, because I mean, basically you can't repeat anything. You cannot enter in the same river like twice. The time is passing. Things becoming obsolete. That's okay. let's try to reread it. So that's why, I mean, I'm rereading certain political projects and I'm rereading media forms. I'm trying to, because at the end it's very much about media, how you showing, seeing things.
And it's important, I think, that in the exhibition upstairs, there's quite an emphasis that's put on the work of exhibition making. So it's not just about the finished product that could be restaged exactly as it was, even though, of course, that's an impossibility. But it's about sort of the backstage work, I think you called it.
Sure.
And this is maybe like a bit of a reach, but when thinking about the role of the essay as form in the film, there's a sense that the essay also, I mean, Georg Lukács says the essay is a process of judgment, but it's not about delivering a verdict. It's about that process of thinking. And it struck me that both in the embrace of the essay as form and in this interest of the making of the exhibition rather than the finished product, we find this double emphasis on process somehow.
It was super important for me. No, that's incredible that you said it. I mean, at the very beginning, I thought about this exhibition. I thought that, okay, I want to speak about certain things. I want to speak about this and that. I want to speak about medium, how it's done, about display. And I thought, okay, well, I mean, after years of research, probably I know some things about it and spectator won't know it. So can I do, maybe I should do some kind of study room, some kind of research space.
Didactic kind of.
Yeah, can I just tell it to someone? I don't know, to kind of remediate lecture in something else. After that, I understood that it's not working at all, because I'm becoming again this kind of historical agent, trying to convince someone in something, like put some information in the brain. And I thought that, well, I will play in this kind of on the borderline, in this gray zone between, I'm not using word reconstruction, restaging, because you're in this exact space, which is like that, but it's different. I mean, there's always this kind of gray zone between repetition, being inspired by something or elaborating certain motives. Yeah, I mean, and again, you said process, because I thought that, okay, study space, study room, it's about process. It should be performative. It should be alive. It's not something that you do and you leave it for months. It's not a static display, because at the end, I had to leave static display. It's not an educational program or something. And if you go into this territory of static displays or something fixed, you need to, I thought that I need to really to show this kind of, this backstage of this conscious industries, which exhibition making is. How do you produce knowledge? How you show things, your images, communicate certain meanings, and it's something that we never see. We basically never see two things. How something been invented and done, like conceived, this exhibition proposals, letters, and so on, and we never see documentation, because it's very like for professionals. It's something that end up in portfolios or somewhere else. We only see, spectators only see this very ephemeral moment, then things are in the space, and after that they disappear forever, and we have just some photographs, and again, these photographs, they're just for professionals. And these documents which were before, these letters, they also disappear in some archive. So you cannot rebuild this, the thinking process, how people arrived to this specific form, to this solution, to this decision.
And this sort of idea about a thinking process, or the sense that the exhibition has somehow a pedagogical responsibility, even if it's very non-didactic, it struck me that there's some relationship between that and this idea of the knowledge commons. That sort of is, in a way, the climax of the film, in some sense. And I'd be interested in hearing you think a little bit about the way that actually communism as an idea, not necessarily as a political system per se, but as an idea, functions in the film as this sort of unrealized futurity. Because this question of, why do we look at the past, what do we find in the past, suggests that we, are looking at the past somehow in the service of the future. Yeah.
Well, the very last phrase, the very last paragraph in the chapter, last scene in the film. Well, I've been asking myself, why in general we should think about this now, about this communism, capitalism. I think it's super interesting because what communism is, it's something invented. It's not something that happened and been conceptualized. It's the human invention, how society can be organized to solve certain issues, equality, inequality. I mean, it's a human-made idea which goes wrong or not in the past or could return in the future, because problems remains. We have a huge problem of inequality, of common resources, and so on. Here, I know specifically in the context of Moscow, we need to decouple communism from historical communism, which happened in Russia. Just think about it as about an idea, human-made idea, which is trying to solve certain issues, which can't be solved in capitalism, because capitalism just by design privatizing things and not caring a lot about living things in some common space. Either it's knowledge or something else, or water or air. So I'm writing this text at the end of the film. Here I'm again quoting some thinkers, and I wanted to build this bridge to the future, because after all this massive of material looking somewhere backwards, I wanted to look in the future, and probably the point of commons, which is already contained in the word communism. This will be the point of re-entry into all these problematics. This is the gate through which I'm entering in all this Soviet experience. Because the question of commonness of knowledge, commons of nature, it's really pressing issues, which how can you work with them through? And there is this historical examples. And these historical examples been communicated through certain medium. And here we come back to the material. So that's the kind of, that's how it was designed, all this narration.
We're going to open up to the audience in just 1 minute, but one last thing from me first. When we're walking up the stairs, we have these amazing large-scale photographs on the wall of what you've told me is the entrance to one of these Soviet photo exhibitions in Milan. And I mean, the most striking thing about those images is the sheer mass of people. And there's a sense that it really encapsulates the project of both the Family of Man and the Soviet photo exhibitions as a project about a mass subject, a collective subject, which of course ties to this notion of communism. That strikes me as an immensely different political project, or an immensely different articulation of the political subject than the one that we find today, which is much more
identity politics.
Which is much more a question of identity politics, exactly. So you've already, this is my question to you, again, about, what is the use of history? What is the use of the past? What is at stake in recovering this mass political subject, the collective subject, today at a time of identity politics? I mean, to put it very bluntly, is this work in some very oblique way a critique of the shortcomings of identity politics?
Well,
I save a hard one for last.
No, yeah, that's good. That's a good one. Well, it's not critique, because I don't feel qualified to critique this kind of things, but maybe it's a questioning. It's a question which I'm asking for myself, because you can build your political subjectivity through trying to find some differences, this identity politics, what makes me different from you or from someone else, and how I will act, how my agency will be channeled regarding these differences, and how I will build some contacts with you, because you will have your own. But at the very same time, I don't know, I will need to organize. I will need to have an organization. So
to find some kind of tie of solidarity somehow.
Yeah, or
community.
I don't know. Yeah, it's again this dialectic between something singular and the common. How singular could be converted in the common? And again, this universalist representation, planet. What planet means for, is it singular or common? It's a singular image of a singular object, which is supposed to mean everything for everybody. I mean, it's like this, I don't know, this clepsydra, you know, this sand, when something like passes into something else.
Like an hourglass?
Yeah, like hourglass, like singular, somehow converted in something. Planet, just one object, one picture, distributed everywhere, supposed to mean everything for everybody.
The whole earth.
Yeah, so basically how identity could become a mass political project. I don't know. It's really difficult question.
I'm sure there must be questions from the audience, which you can ask in Russian or in English.
Давайте тогда, может, пока думают, while the audience is thinking, I could address the first question. And actually, Erika, in your research, one of the questions that you refer is the question of the collapse of reality. And Vladis, in his project, refers to this moment of the collapse of mass dream walls, mass ideological utopias of the 20th century. And I wonder, have you thought about this moment of the collapse of the dream walls, when suddenly like society realized the political decisions that were behind it? Could we tell about it? Is the moment, I don't know, of the capture of reality, or the moment when we're very close to it?
I mean, that's also a very large question. Let's see. So, I mean, I think that the moment of like a kind of collapse of more or less a binary kind of organization of the world, whether it's, you know, USSR, US, brings a kind of relativism into play, which at the time I think was conceived as a very progressive project, right? So like, now is the time to critique ideas of universalism, of authenticity, of objectivity, because these are myths, and we need to deconstruct them and show that they actually mask this will to power. And so this is the moment of the kind of like 80s and 90s postmodern deconstruction of reality as something that was very progressive. But in the text that you're referring to, I was, I guess, interested in trying to question whether that framework is still one that we can hold on to today, or whether it's become something that now we have to push back against. And so in a way it really chimes with what Vladis was saying about trying to reclaim, to kind of, is it now necessary to reclaim a universalism? Right, now that we've broken it absolutely apart, do we need to somehow reconstruct it in revised form? And so in my particular case, I was interested in thinking about artist documentary practices, which have, you know, for the last 20 years or so been absolutely invested in a suspicion of our ability to make a claim on the real, to make a claim on actuality. And my question was, you know, in an age of post-truth politics, or when reality has collapsed, quote unquote, is this project still a necessary one? Or does it just reproduce some of the most disturbing aspects of our society, right? Is it now necessarily actually to make truth claims and to insist that, you know, reality and fiction are very, very different things? So in a way, it also connects to what Vladis was saying about reconstructing an exhibition. Like, you can't step in the same river twice. The same critical gesture in 1992 means something very different from making that gesture now. So I think that, a critique of objectivity, very important at a certain point in time in the past. Now I think that maybe objectivity is something that we need to defend.
Don't you think that paradoxically objectivity will return through fiction, through fiction film? I mean, how can you? I mean, because in the dimension of ideas, but how you will express it? Is it possible to express it through documentary language, through documentary cinema, or should it be fictionalized narrative, fiction cinema, which can claim? Could it be that fiction cinema, okay, let's do it, fiction cinema or fictional exhibition, whatever, can claim truth?
Absolutely. I mean, I think much truth can be produced through fiction, but I would also say that there's a special task of nonfiction documentary cinema that can enable a different kind of encounter with reality. The production of truth is sort of something else, but a kind of encounter with reality. And of course, it's not like what Donna Haraway would call the God trick. It's not objectivity as a view from nowhere, but instead some kind of situated objectivity that recognizes the place from which we speak and the place from which we look, but that insists somehow on that as something that is qualitatively different from fictional. Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is to both speakers, but mainly to the guest speaker. So, in your text, which is also presented in the library here, you mention the theoretic of actor network theory, but not in your argument, only in the epigram and so on. So the question to the both speakers: what do you see the role of the actor network theory in your investigations and in modern documentary turn? Thanks.
I can start, I guess. I'm quite ambivalent about it. I mean, obviously, it's a very trendy theoretical paradigm at the moment. So my somewhat critique of it is that I think there's this sort of danger of leveling, like this kind of idea of a flat ontology of horizontal actors. I mean, that I think can step into some territory that I don't want to. So I'm critical of it in some ways, but in the text, the epigraph that I used is from Bruno Latour's Why Has Critique Run Out of Steam? And the epigraph is something like, is it necessary to pile ruins on top of ruins, right? And what I was trying to get at with that was the idea that maybe this relentless negativity of critique, so in the case of documentary, this idea that all we have to do is dismantle a claim to reality. And that if we do that, we've done our job, and we can say, see, I don't believe, I'm not a dupe, right? I have a critical subjectivity who recognizes that everything is constructed. Fine. What does that get us? Right? I mean, and it really is the sense that Latour talks about moving from dismantling to constructing. And in fact, to sort of take up a process of care and assembly, that was something I was really interested in sort of taking and trying to use to think about how artists or filmmakers might approach reality. So not as something to be deemed inaccessible, not to say, like documentary is impossible, but actually to think about documentary that as a form that could actually allow for a kind of care toward reality, not a suspicion of it. So that's where, I mean, that's not actor network theory per se. It's more very specifically this kind of notion that critique has maybe run out of steam. So I ask, has the critique of documentary constructedness run out of steam? Actor network theory, I'm a bit more skeptical?
No, I mean, from my side, I don't know. I can't name any theory which I've been using as a kind of tool. I've been trying always to go from the material. I don't know, something that the medium or picture or image in itself will suggest, because I think that all forms are already contained in some way. You need just to kind of to give them space to unfold, and it will start working in some way.
That's like a good definition of the difference between the artist and the scholar, huh?
I mean, in some way, maybe. Wow, that's a good point. I never thought about it like that. Yeah, indeed, that happened. Well, the relationships which I've been trying to construct, that in the film you see the very same materials, but in their, let's say, natural environment. So you see this film reel, you see these pictures in archive. It's designed to be together, the exhibition and the film, but at the very same time they can be separated. Moreover, the works can be separated from each other, because this constellation is particularly for this space, for this city, for this occasion. So, well, it's kind of modular structure. I don't know, I'm thinking about it as about modular structure. It's not, there is no finitude in it. I mean, it's not something rigid, closed in itself, and you can separate, you can take away. In this case, in Moscow, yeah, I think it works like that. That film is explaining you everything you saw before, and after the film you see it again, and you see it differently because you already know. I mean, it's not that film is more important than the show, and the film explains the installations. I think that they work differently. First time you see the works, after that you see the film, and after that you see the works again, and I think it's different works, because you already have some additional knowledge. So it's not really relationships between some pieces and explanation of pieces, or puzzle and the manual how to collect these pieces, but I mean, but they're together and not together at the same time. You're right.
Hi, I work in documentary film industry, and I have a question. And I think that today's the tendency in the film industry, and people who work with documentary and the side of film industry, they're very much trying to be more artistic, because this, I think it they have to do that because they want documentary genre to be competitive, and they want documentary films to be included in A-class film festivals and so on and so forth, while people on the side of art industry, so to speak. So, I mean, people from the film industry, they're trying to be more artistic and more imaginative, and they actually get trying to get rid of reality, and people who work in the sphere of the artwork, they're on the other hand, well, otherwise trying to get more closer to reality. And could you comment on that? And I'm actually interested whether you do monitor what is happening in documentary film industry today, and maybe you could mention some directors which are particularly interesting to you, if there are any.
Sure. I mean, I guess the first thing that I would say is I wonder about even making a very, very strict division between, say, the documentary industry and the art context, because when I look at the contemporary situation, part of what I would say is very distinctive about it is exactly the emergence within the last 20 years or so of this kind of middle ground where you see a lot of artists, like someone we were talking earlier about, Eric Baudelaire, who makes really fascinating documentary work. He's, absolutely a visual artist, works, has commercial gallery representation, etc., but also shows in documentary film festivals. So there is that kind of crossover. And I think that from both sides we can say that there's a kind of similar project which is at stake, which has to do sort of with what I was talking about earlier in a certain way about, on the one hand, problematizing claims to, objective truth, right, through forms of creativity, docufiction, ecstatic truth, as Werner Herzog would call it. But then on the other hand, I think that part of what has attracted contemporary artists to documentary is exactly the sense of urgency that comes from making a claim on actuality, right? That's a political urgency, but it's also something that, ties in with, I think, a fatigue with postmodernist strategies that has emerged, at least since Documenta 11, but maybe even earlier. So, I think there are differences between the film industry context and the fine art context, but I see many similarities across them in terms of other people that I think are interesting. We were talking earlier about Philippa César and Louis Henderson, who just made a great work together.
Sure.
Eric Baudelaire, Ben Rivers,
And I don't know, but where you will
Kevin
put
Jerome Everson.
Farocki,
who is obviously
where he is in
all-time
in
great.
the film or in art.
Farocki for decades was a filmmaker, and it was only relatively late in his career that really for economic reasons, when funding dried up from West German television, he increasingly moved into the art context. And so on the one hand, it's financial possibilities, but on the other hand, and this maybe links to Varvara's last question, it's an expanded field of aesthetic possibilities, because all of a sudden it's not just single channel, it can be multi-screen installation, it can involve the display of documents, and there's really a kind of endless set of possibilities that one can explore. And so I think, we see also people like Chantal Ackerman, Chris Marker,
with the multi-screen installations,
moving exactly relatively late in their career into a closer relationship with a fine art context.
That's true. I